It's 7:07. We're with David Gouin. He's the Director of Housing and Community Services for the City of Santa Rosa. And there's a lot of stuff happening right now in the housing world.
That's correct.
It's crazy. Not just, across the United States, it's crazy. But in Santa Rosa in particular, given the relative lack of inventory, the more visibility of the homeless due to various displacement events, what's happening? What's happening in Santa Rosa?
Yeah, it's exactly the way we spend our time now as a city. It's the two prominent council goals: affordable housing, housing for all,
right,
and addressing the homeless issue. So it has our full attention. We've reorganized departments to focus more exclusively on just those topics. So that you're right, there is a lot going on right now.
It's exciting because I think Santa Rosa is poised to actually beat the problem. It will be a perennial problem because that's just the nature of these things. But as I understand, there's been a dip in the homeless rate by about 30%.
That's correct.
That's huge.
Yes. Yeah, it tells us it's making an impact. Every year there's a census of the homeless population required by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, a federal department. And it's conducted through Catholic Charities, the Continuum of Care, these other groups. But yes, there has been an impact that homelessness has actually gone down, yet it seems to be more visible in our community.
Now, one of the theories that I brought up in another interview that was brought to my attention from a gentleman who works with SMART, the train, was that because of the tracks, which have heretofore been relatively dormant, a lot of people who used to camp there have been moved. And so we were seeing them downtown and that kind of thing. But another factor that I didn't consider was the Clean Waterways initiative, which also has driven people away from like the rivers and that kind of thing. So where do they go? They come downtown?
Yeah, we wish we had some real clear data points on that, but so it's anecdotal to us. But yes, SMART is managing the rail line because the train is going to start up here in a few months.
And there's safety issues and concerns like that.
That's exactly right. And then there's our water department and the county water agency are managing their waterways differently now, more aggressively, assertively, for water quality standards. So encampments are now moving around town, and they're coming into downtown and other places.
Yeah.
So we don't have any interview dialogue to confirm that, but that's our suspicion.
Yeah, and so how do we address that? I mean, I know the city obviously has had some success, and you guys are being very, very aggressive about it, but what are some of the things we can highlight that the city is currently doing to mitigate that? Yeah,
it's huge. In the last 8 months, the city has doubled its investment in this program.
Yeah.
So for example, just the start of the year, last July, the city sponsored the operations of 3 shelters.
Wow.
There's the Homeless Service Center on Morgan Street, the Family Support Center on A Street, and then the Samuel Jones Hall. And that was pretty much it for the homeless services, because it was primarily the work of the county, because they're the service providers for the area. But in the last 8 months, we've expanded with the Homeless Outreach Service Team. I think Ginny Lynn talked to you about that.
A little bit, yeah.
We've sponsored a restroom shower to try and engage homeless folks into services. We've sponsored the administration of a grant program operated out of CAP Sonoma to help folks with first-last deposits, or if they fall behind in their rent.
Oh, interesting. That's great.
It can keep them from becoming homeless. And so those are some examples. And then we've been more involved in coordinating and networking with other service groups so that we can implement Santa Rosa's plan for housing first, rapid rehousing around the national model. I would just add that Santa Rosa is one of many communities in the country with an inventory problem. So the model is you invite folks into housing and then wrap them with services, but you have to have that housing unit available, and that's where we're trying our best.
I know, and how do you fix it? Everything's so expensive here. Even if the city was going to build an apartment building, just that alone would be millions of dollars. I mean, it's crazy.
Yes. It is the city's most expensive business model is to create affordable housing. And it used to be the job of redevelopment agencies.
Right.
And just quickly, a redevelopment would sponsor the local subsidy so a developer could go out and get the rest of their financing and build the units. When that went away 6 years ago, it's been reliant on any other local source, and that's really been a strain on our general fund.
Right. So, I mean, what are we going to do?
Yeah. Well, right now the council's very much engaged, as I mentioned, in this Housing for All goal. And so just this next Tuesday night on June 7th, we are, as staff, in front of them to present a work plan to look at other ways to raise revenue for affordable housing purposes. And I have a little crib sheet.
Right on, yeah.
So we basically have their direction currently to do 7 things. One is to sustain the current level of general fund support for homeless services and housing. We're going to study the notion of what's called a commercial linkage fee. So that's the idea that if you develop retail or commercial property, you create a job, you create a need for housing, that maybe there's a nexus for some fee revenue to help come in and support affordable housing.
That's interesting. Okay, yeah.
We're looking at short-term investments from grants and state funding that are pending right now, and I can go into that detail.
Well, I mean, would you identify the situation as having reached a crisis point? Okay.
Yes, I would. I mean, if you, for example, we have people, homeless individuals and families, that don't want to be homeless. They want to be sheltered. And they're working with Catholic Charities and the other service providers to come into services and find a place. And in partnership with the nonprofit service providers, we're doing our best to try and find them a place and help them with their rent. We just don't have that inventory.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me how there's the city as the umbrella entity, essentially, and then you have all of these nonprofits that have their hat in the ring doing similar services. How do those partnerships develop, and what's the criteria to work with a specific nonprofit as a city agency?
Well, basically, the city's role is to be the funder and the contract administrator, because it's very difficult to staff up the public sector to provide the social services, unless, of course, you're from the county of Sonoma, which has mental health services and behavioral health. And
also, these particular nonprofits are often in the neighborhoods that they can serve better, and so they're already on the ground floor. So
that's exactly right, and that's what HOST is, the Homeless Outreach Service Team. Is, imagine the intimacy of that conversation. You have a social worker, you have a mental health professional, you have a police officer, you have maybe a representative from Social Advocates for Youth, and you're in a dialogue with that homeless person and inviting them in, trying to build trust that it's okay to come into housing and that we will help you to get there. The city's role in that is the funder. We sponsor the contract, we sponsor the rental assistance, and on the other side we're trying to cause nonprofit developers to build the units. So that's our role in that.
It's a lot of work.
It is, and it's exciting, and it's a lot of fun. And like you said earlier when we started, we believe we are making an impact with the drop in the numbers. We're coming out of the recession, and so the whole building inventory has been stalled, and we're looking at a variety of ways here to try and cause development to occur.
Let's look at that in the next segment. We're talking with David Gouin. He's the Director of Housing and Community Services for the City of Santa Rosa. We'll be right back. We're back on 707. I'm Daedalus Howell, and we have David Gouin here. He's the Director of Housing and Community Services for the City of Santa Rosa. We left off in the last segment talking about a variety of issues, but not least of which being the inventory crisis that we're having in Santa Rosa. But before we go do a deep dive into that, you live in Santa Rosa.
I do.
Have you always lived in Santa Rosa?
I have not.
Let's back up. Where did you come from?
Yeah, quickly, my background, I came from the state of Michigan. I was intrigued with California, and so when I got out of college, it was one of the first things I did is took a motorcycle trip.
What is this, like 1990 something?
It was in the early 80s.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Motorcycle, or would you?
Yes. Yes. You have to appreciate growing up in Michigan is the entire state is watching the Rose Parade, and everyone's in T-shirts enjoying the sunny Southern California weather. So
Right.
that was me coming out here to see that.
That's great.
Yeah.
Wow. And then what did you do when you first arrived?
Well, I got involved working with the County of Sonoma. I was a social worker.
Oh, straight up. You've
Yep.
always just done this kind of
I
thing.
knew I wanted to be in the helping professions coming out of college.
Well, what did you study in college?
Sociology, psychology.
Wow.
Went back and got my master's in public administration right here in Sonoma State.
Right on. Yeah.
And just worked through, social welfare programs, affordable housing, got into the redevelopment, economic development world.
Wow. So you're a lifer with this kind of thing.
Yes, I am.
Obviously, it's a call to service of a sort. Where do you think that impulse comes from?
Well, it probably from my family background. I knew kind of coming out of high school that I probably wouldn't be happy working for corporate America. And I just knew I would be in the service profession somehow. I didn't necessarily knew it would be housing.
Were they involved, your parents, in this kind of thing, or?
No, my dad worked in the private sector.
Yeah.
But the idea came, I really wanted to help youth. It was I was started out as a juvenile probation officer.
Oh, wow.
And that led to working in group homes and housing at-risk youth and trying to be a counselor and work with them in that environment, and that led to how do you build housing, and
Right.
how do you do rehabilitation, and how does that relate to commercial, and so here I am today.
And now,
Yeah.
now you're the director of housing, but
Yes.
you're also the executive director of Santa Rosa's Housing Authority.
Correct.
What is that?
So in Santa Rosa, there's a separate board called the Housing Authority. They're interviewed by the council and then appointed, and they are charged with overseeing all the city's affordable housing programs, soup to nuts, A to
Okay.
Z. So housing choice voucher program, vouchers for homeless veterans, all of our production efforts to cause new housing to be built, rehabilitation, home ownership for low-income folks,
Wow.
and special needs housing such as shelters and things like that.
So let's say I'm a developer and I want to do some live work spaces, some fancy, like retro looking warehousey kind of downtown hipster spaces. Who do I call, or who calls me to incentivize me to do that downtown?
Yeah. So right now, if you were looking at it being market rate and not necessarily affordable, you would be going into our planning department probably to
Right.
get your permit.
But don't you guys bake in some affordable housing initiatives into any new development?
That's correct, and that's what we're doing on June 7th. It's called Inclusionary Housing. So for example, in your case, you would come in and say you want to build 20 units or convert this to 20 units.
Right.
We would sit down and talk to you about how we can incentivize you to create, say, 2 or 3 of those to be affordable.
Okay.
And typically, as a developer, you're looking at a market rent here
Right.
and affordable rent here, and that gap is filled with a subsidy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, well, what affordable is a relative term. What is affordable now? Where's the ceiling on that?
Okay. Well, an example would be right now in this market, a 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment is about $1,800.
Wow.
Affordable would be about $1,000 for that household size.
Okay, but this is for a family, I would imagine, or people with some kind of income.
Yes.
Right.
So a 3-person household, mom, dad, and a child decide to rent a 2-bedroom apartment.
With at least one parent employed, obviously. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
But what if I'm a homeless guy and I want to live in the downtown loft? I mean,
Yeah.
is that
Deeper subsidy.
Wow. Okay.
But again, many homeless folks have a source of income: Social Security, SSI, disability, and so again, they can help. Some, not all, but many can help contribute something towards rent and the housing costs, and we would look at, subsidizing the difference.
I see.
And then in exchange for that, the person would be agreeing to, job training and trying to start taking steps to improve their situation.
So as I understand, homelessness is actually more expensive for the city than in creating housing for them.
Yes. And that's after the national model called Housing First. Is after years of study, they realized that the overall cost to a community, from an emergency room visit to the police calls, to the fire station calls, to just the impact in commercial districts, and the idea that, okay, you want to come into shelters, but first you have to work on sobriety and all those conditions. It's more efficient economically and better for the individual and the service providers is to get them into a stable housing environment first and then start working on their particular needs.
So, I mean, obviously the city understands this. Do you find it difficult to get that narrative across to the citizens?
You know, I don't actually.
Yeah.
What I found in this job is that people have different levels of understanding, beliefs, or perceptions about the subject. But when I have a conversation like this and I tell them, just like I just told you, what the idea is, it's kind of like, oh yeah, it makes sense to people, in my opinion. So I'm getting receptivity to that.
Yeah, no, I could see that. I mean, it certainly has illuminated my perception having talked about this a lot lately. It's been coming up a lot. I mean, it's a huge thing now.
It is in my opinion, the #1 topic facing the city. Usually you'll hear something like roads or water and things like that, and those are all important. But when you're commercial districts, we're spending money reunifying Courthouse Square. We have a very visible issue, and we're a very compassionate community. Right. What I found is people want to help, and so part of this is how do we engage the community, the ecumenical community, on ways to help provide these services as well, and we're well into that discussion.
I was going to ask you, how does an agency like Catholic Charities, which is part of the ecumenical community, work with the city government when there's that separation of church and state and that kind of thing?
Yeah, good question. The Catholic Charities is non-denominational. They're separate from the church in a way. They're not prophesizing or to accept services. You don't have to accept the sermon or anything.
Of course,
like
yeah. They're I just want to say for the record, a great organization.
Yeah, they're doing good work.
But so, is there any criticism of that ever though? Like why is the city working with this kind of agency? I would imagine not. Yeah. Not
really. Not once folks understand it. Another example, good people, Jeff Gilman and the Redwood Gospel Mission. They're providing good services as well. And part of their model is to to have a Christian theme in that, and part of the rehabilitation of the individual involves religion. So so the city doesn't sponsor their efforts directly with financing, but Catholic Charities is different that way.
It's a different style of program, right. Hey, we're talking with David Gouin. He's the Director of Housing and Community Services for the City of Santa Rosa. This is 707, and we'll be right back. It's 7:07. We're back with David Gouin. He's the Director of Housing and Community Services for the City of Santa Rosa. This is a really interesting talk, in large part because obviously, as I think we both agree, this is the issue right now in Santa Rosa. One thing that our producer John brought to my attention was the fact that sure, we have a lot of nonprofit partners and they're extremely invested in this, and it's wonderful. But on the commercial side of things, my rather glib take would be their problem is largely an optics one. They don't want homeless people in front of their retail spaces and that kind of thing. How does the city engage that aspect, working with the commercial sector to help alleviate this problem? And what incentivizes them besides just cleaning up the neighborhood and that kind of thing?
Yeah, it is a challenge. For example, your life's work is in your store on 4th Street or 5th Street, and there's somebody sleeping in your doorway.
And that's where the action is. It's all 4th Street, really. That's where you see a lot of this activity.
Yeah, we have a well-educated and engaged downtown association and Railroad Square Association that I believe understand the problem, and they know the city's doing everything they can. They see the service provider. They see what I mentioned earlier, the host team engaging the folk.
I should say I'm not trying to identify the retailers as evil and heartless.
No, of course not.
It's just that they face the problem every day, right? And in some instances, and whereas those of us in the burbs don't necessarily. So, and I would imagine that's frustrating.
Yes, to them. Very frustrating, and they're engaged. For example, the Chamber of Commerce, the downtown group, have a working committee on this. They have members involved in a homeless planning group with Catholic Charities. We are in the Railroad Square, they're very much involved with the service providers in that neighborhood. So it is, I think it depends a lot on the customer as well.
Right.
For example, if you're from a visitor from a large urban area, the feedback we get is, what's the problem?
Yeah, right, totally.
But you know, we're a suburban community and we love our downtown, and we expect it to not have a very big homeless population.
You know, though, you're onto something with the differential between like small town and like urban environments. I moved here from Oakland, right? And so I'm sort of in the camp of like, really? You got a homeless problem? Like, you want to see a homeless problem? Yeah. And so it's fascinating to me that we're in this, Santa Rosa's in this place where it's becoming a bigger city, right? And this will always be an issue to some degree. I guess it just comes down to like how much it can be mitigated so it doesn't affect as many people as it does, and of course helps the homeless people most of all.
Correct. So the service provider, like I've been talking about, that happens every day, and I think the more, it's sort of a volume question. For example, in Oakland during the business day, there's so many people on the streets, homeless might not be as visible. Right. But it becomes visible in Santa Rosa as the day dies down, and there isn't as many foot traffic, for example. The challenge for Santa Rosa coming forward, and as a community we have to have this dialogue, is if we are engaged with this person and we're inviting them into services, as I've been saying, and they keep declining, then what? So if it's not okay to lay down and sleep here, but it's okay to go to this shelter, this service provider, and they're not accepting that invitation, what might we do? And we haven't had that dialogue yet with the city council. We haven't had it with our neighbor associations or downtown groups, but I see that as the next step in making sure we have a comprehensive strategy on this issue. That's
a very interesting point, the reluctance of some people to participate in the system for a variety of reasons, I'm sure. I would imagine there's a lot of trust issues, and maybe issues relating to mental health and that kind of thing where they just don't want to engage. Yep. What do you do? Do you have a way to address that?
No, we're in that discussion right now.
Still discovering how to,
It's all around the premise, though, that everything is around engagement. So even law enforcement. And so the accountability, not that you're homeless and is a crime, but maybe you're committing crimes while you're homeless, and so how do you...
Because you're homeless, perhaps. Yeah.
And so whether it's trespassing or not agreeing to an abatement order or drunk in public, those types of things, those nuisance crimes, well, we're looking at a homeless court model, so to speak, where, I'll just cut to the chase, you're in front of the judge, and you either get 180 days in jail or you accept Catholic Charity's offer for help as I call it the ultimate engagement discussion. So we're heading in that direction, I think. A lot of work to do, a lot of partners from the district attorney to the courts to law enforcement to have that structure. But that's, I think, what we're headed.
Is there precedent for that model? I mean, that's...
Yes. Okay. Yeah, we went to, actually, the city of Phoenix has a model like this, Alameda, and so we're learning best practices from other communities on this. And they're actually now starting to learn from us now that we've been in this for a while.
I would imagine, I mean, the jail would be managed by the county, so the county doesn't want that. They want to inherit the cost of that issue, right? So the hope is that everyone diverts into a more... Yeah.
That's a good point. I mean, if you do these criminal acts and the ultimate being held accountable is jail time, well, that's what you have.
That's what it is, yeah.
But we would prefer it not to be the option.
Wow. Hey, do you think this can be fixed? Do you think, I mean, I keep saying this will be a persistent problem, but that's just me being a jerk. I mean, do you think we could actually have zero homelessness?
I do, and I'm an optimist, and I see what's out there, and what the ultimate goal of the City Council is what's called functional zero. And what does that term mean is a recognition that there will always be families and individuals that become homeless for reasons. And if we can house and get folks in the services at or near the same rate, functional zero might be whatever number that ends up being for Santa Rosa, a constant, but it doesn't grow.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and we catch folks early. So like within 30, 45 days, they're back into with a roof over their head rather than living along Santa Rosa Creek or elsewhere.
Yeah, and that's huge. That's huge in terms of the impact on those individuals' lives, if their children's lives, if they're living with them in that context. I mean, that could be
performance in school, diet, health. It is a health issue. Living in your car is not. It's just not okay to live outside. So the ultimate. Back to your question, I believe we can get there.
Yeah.
I see the path of travel, and we have like I said, a very benevolent community and great service providers.
And this is how Santa Rosa pays it forward to itself.
Yeah.
We're talking with David Gouin. He's the Director of Housing and Community Services for the City of Santa Rosa. Good stuff, man. Hope you come back. We'll talk again.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah.